have a confession. I tried for the longest time not to ask you to come on the podcast.
Okay.
So I had a little list of people that I wanted to come on. And of course, you've written your book, so it was a no-brainer. But I thought I'll do some people first, and then I'll ask her, because then I'll have a few under my belt. I'll feel more confident. And then what kept happening is that people kept dropping out.
Oh, no.
I would ask.
So backup.
Like, I would ask people and they'd be like, oh, sorry, we can't come. And I'm like, and your name was like, just
Becoming
like,
on the short
yes.
list.
It was just like watching me. Your name was like looking just core, kind of thing. And then again, it happened. And I just thought, I'd just send that message and ask her. So I sent you a message and asked. And I sent you the longest message so that you would have all the information. And you basically just said the equivalent of, yes, I will. So you can imagine how I felt when I got to the end of the book. And you had
the lesson at the end.
The lessons at the end. And on page 173 here, it says your lesson number 5 is ask. Some of the most life-changing moments in my life have come because I mustered up the courage to ask for an opportunity. You'd be surprised. People often say yes. So I already learned my first lesson.
Indeed. Although I have a friend, Natasha, who she's really brilliant at setting boundaries. So she's like perfected the no. And I think I might want to get a leaf of her, because sometimes you do need your boundaries to save your energy.
Yes. But I was interested. When was the last time you felt like that? With an ask that felt scary to you?
It's never scary, but I think the most gratifying yes that I received was when I asked Tuli Madonsela to come and be our guest of honor at the last gala dinner, my final one before I left office. I was like, wow. Yeah, and because I had gotten a number of a friend. I sent her messages. I sent her PA whatever messages and whatever. And because I had a number, I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna call. And I did. And she answered, and she was very understanding. I was like, yes, it works. Same thing happened with Strive Masiwa. I was like, yeah, just ask.
And it's just, they always say, just call. Like, stop sending endless messages, just call.
Indeed.
Interesting. So then I thought, okay, now you said yes. How am I going to introduce you? And everybody knows everything, No,
not.
It's all out there, like first female as president and all of that. But I thought, what do I think? Like, how would I personally introduce you? And so I thought about the times when I've come across your work. And I thought about Bill 10, and that was a seminal moment. I felt like I thought about the case at the Concord with Ed Galungu. And that was really funny, because as I was reading this, you talked about how you're wearing your trainers.
Ready to run.
Just in case you needed to run. But the one that stuck out to me the most was during the last elections, when we had voted and the internet shut down. And it was a huge moment, because I had only voted for the first time in the previous election.
Okay.
And there was a lot of, electioneering at the time. And everyone in my proximity was sort of on the other side from who I was voting for. And so when UPND lost that election, it was sort of rubbed in my face, but it also felt really almost stolen. It felt like it felt almost stolen. So coming into the next election, I just felt we have to do it this time. We have to make sure that it happens. And every time, so like it was Bill 10 first, and it thought, okay, we're getting there. And then, Concord, okay, maybe we're getting there, and then final day, we voted. The internet shuts down. I voted at the golf club, and there were other people. You did?
I did, yes, I was there.
And there were other people.
Four maybe.
4?
Yeah.
And there are other people in the line, and the bus starts going around. They've shut down the internet. And I just thought, they're going to do it. We're going to lose our rights, you know? And so then I was sitting on Twitter on a VPN, because everybody had to be on a VPN now because there's no more internet. And just saw was it a press statement? I can't remember what it was. And it was just, you know, Chapter 1 Foundation. And, you know, you have to switch on the internet. And I just, when I read that moment in the book, I got goosebumps.
Oh, wow.
Like I literally had tears. I had tears on that night thinking, wow, this woman, you know? What was that time like for you? Because I'm imagining espionage and like all sorts of things.
You know, I always tell people that the fear was that you didn't know what you didn't know. Like you never knew where the danger could come from, because at that time we were living in a period where colorism was very rife, and you know, they were unruly. Anything could happen, right? Yeah. But, you know, this is where I feel my faith really played a part, because my conviction in what I was doing was so strong that I couldn't be deterred from my path. And I believe he kept me safe. So there was that. But in the moment, so I think that the most eerie thing was after getting the order, because we got it at night, and then we had to now serve it on Zictor. And driving through the streets of Lusaka on election day was so eerie. And if you recall, the government had also sent the army onto the streets. So I was like, anyway, we drove. It was so eerily quiet. You know, we managed to serve the documents. I got home. I'm very sure I was monitored. I know I was, but like I said, there was just such a deep conviction, and that this was the right thing to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. We've dealt with the heavy stuff. Let's go into the layout of the book. The thing that's ringing in my head is, let's start at the very beginning.
Indeed. Have you watched it?
I can't stop singing it. You've put it in my head. So maybe we should explain.
Movie, The Sound of Music. You must watch it, everybody.
And you talk about how, you know, as a child, you watched a lot of The Sound of Music. You did a lot of like writing of poems and short stories. What was little Linda Kasonde writing about?
You know, one of the great things about modern times is how information, creativity, inclusivity, diversity have become more acceptable. Because when I was growing up, really, I mean, the things I was reading, now looking back, was so anglicized. I mean, I was into Enid Blyton's books.
Of course.
The kinds of movies we were watching were like Western classics, like The Sound of Music, like Mary Poppins. So nobody back then was really writing books for us. And I mean, that's part of the reason why I wrote the book, that it must be in my voice. My story must be in my voice, to not just my people, but anybody beyond. I think it's a story of universal application, not just a Zambian story. So actually, initially, when I was creating the title of the book, I was very clear on the first part, which was Women Resilient in the Will to Lead. Yeah. But at one point at the beginning, I'd put a colon, an African story. And then a friend of mine said to me, she's Ghanaian, she said, Linda, firstly, it's a Zambian story. This business of global Africa doesn't really exist. I was like, yeah, I was persuaded. I was going to make it a Zambian story. Then I thought, what the hell? Nobody says it's a French story or a German story or an English story. They're just
like, why should we always
the title? So I left it just like that: Women, Resilience, and the Will to Lead.
And when did that spark first come? When did that desire to write a book first come? Because I was watching one of your talks at Stanford, and it had a similar title. Did you already then have the idea that this was going to turn into a book, or did that come later on?
So I actually wrote an article first under the same title, Women, Resilience, and the Will to Lead. I think in about 2016. That was sort of what I was experiencing as a woman leader on the national stage. And it actually made up the bulk of what is one of the final chapters of my book. And so then the Stanford talk was about the article. So I think I've mentioned, I'm sure you've noticed from the book, that I was very heavily influenced by the book Lean In. And, at the time it came out, it was lauded by lots of people as being, something of a feminist
Bible. Almost.
Yes, exactly. Until people started rubbishing it.
And I never got to read it. They started rubbishing it. And so because of that transition, I was like, maybe it's, I don't know, not that great.
Well, I think it's quite unfair to have done that, because I don't think anybody can write a book about the experience of being a woman that is universally applicable.
Right.
So it spoke to a lot of people, including me. I mean, for me, when you read a book, you can decide what to take from it and what not to.
Right.
So there's no need to rubbish somebody. That's their point of view.
Yes,
you know what I mean? So there were lots of gems in the book. So I also thought that the title was very powerful. So the full title is Lean In, Women, Work, and the Will to Lead. So I liked the second part. I thought, well, you know what? My story is essentially one about resilience. That's what really resonated with me more particularly. So I swapped out the work for resilience. And that's how I got my title.
And then the process of writing it. When did you find the time?
So after I left LAS, I went on a sabbatical, my first sabbatical. It was about a period of 6 months or so. I think from 2019 into 2020. No, that's not right. About 2019 anyway. And so that's when I started writing my book. But I sort of wrote the first maybe 27 pages during that time, and then just left it, and then picked it up again a bit later on, a year or so later.
Yeah. When you say the first 27 pages, is it the first 27 pages that end up here? No. Did you write in order?
No, I did not. But actually, most of my work, the book is sort of, I really wish I'd kept a diary.
Yeah.
I'm a bit scared of keeping diaries. But it would have been nice to actually do it in real time.
Yeah.
A lot of politicians do that, actually. I think that's why you often have, for example, US presidents.
Yes.
That's what makes up their autobiographies or biographies. They keep notes.
Yeah. But you didn't write in order.
I did not. Yeah. So actually, a lot of it was made up of articles I'd written over the years, which had talked about specific periods of time.
Okay.
While I was, whether it was at the Law Association, and then a little bit later in chapter 1. Yeah.
Because it did feel especially the beginning parts of it, or you could tell the parts of it that were like written before almost as speeches and then added to. And then there's the certain sections of the book where you really delve into like aspects of your life that we haven't known about before, which is obviously the writing is a little bit different in those parts, but we'll come to that. I'm interested in how you the sections that you made and how you decided on doing that, how you decided on laying the book out like that, and having it be both your history, the history of Zambia, and also almost like a textbook at the same time. So like when I mentioned the ask part at the end of it, which is something that you also did in your TED talk, where at the end of your talk, you had like, these are the takeaways. How deliberate was that, creating that, the way that the book will be laid out?
Well, I think I knew for sure that I would start with, it matters how it starts, because I believe that your foundation sets you up for whatever else you do in life. And I often say it's biblical, the foolish man built his house upon the sand, and the wise man built his house upon the rock. If you have a solid foundation, it doesn't, it's not that it doesn't matter what happens to you, but you'll always have a base from which to rebuild. And so I wanted to speak a little bit about how I grew up, the influence of my parents, my school, my environment, and my extended family. I mentioned my uncle was a politician. So yes, all those things added to who I am and my worldview.
And the teaching aspect of it as well. Was that important for you to have that?
At the end, yes. I thought, well, one of the reasons I wrote the book is because we so rarely hear from women leaders. Like, in terms of what firstly, what were their experiences? And then what did you learn from them? What can you impart upon generations to come? So that was very, very definitely deliberate.
And then another thing that would have been deliberate is what you included in the book itself. There are many moments within this that are, incredibly vulnerable. Some moments that people would have thought you would avoid, like the Hot FM interview and the fallout from that, admitting a lot of mistakes or things that you say might have been in hindsight mistakes. How did you decide what to keep and what to leave out?
Actually, let me think. Well, the two things I was deliberate about, firstly, writing about my experience with child loss and burnout, because those are things that people don't discuss in our culture. And so many women have come up to me and said, this was my experience. And they almost feel that they can't, it's not expected for them to still be thinking about it, even if they've got children subsequent to the event.
Especially if they have children.
Especially if they have children. Like, this is something, move on quickly. So I was very deliberate about talking about that, particularly highlighting the problem of infant and maternal mortality in Zambia, which was certainly at one point was extremely high. It's certainly come down. But I wanted to highlight that. I also wanted people to think about the woman who's experiencing that, and that it's not as easy as it seems. Just as an example, recently I heard about somebody in my network who whose child had lost an infant, maybe just after childbirth, but still within infancy. And I think the one of their parents said of them, well, we won't make a very big deal of the funeral because it's just a small thing. That, as in talking about the child, it was just a small. So I was just like, I'm sure they don't mean it in a bad way. They weren't trying to be mean, but they didn't think that because it wasn't a baby that it meant very much. And so often people forget that it's not just about the loss of the infant. It's also thinking about what could have been.
Yes.
So that is very much on the mind of mothers who lose babies, for sure. Burnout, something that I wanted to talk about because in our culture, again, it's not encouraged to speak about mental health issues. And this is a distinction between mental illness and mental health.
Yes.
I'm talking about stress, burnout, things that wear people down. And so often, these things manifest in other ways, like in physical symptoms like high blood pressure or, well, that's the one that immediately comes to mind.
Yes.
Yeah. And everybody's like, it's just something that people, you just toughen up,
Yeah, stop thinking.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, exactly.
What was it like writing those parts? Were you ever hesitant or did you just, I'm putting it all there?
The part, the part the part that was I was a bit hesitant about was so I've read I think you've read Michelle Obama's 2 recent books,
yes.
right? Becoming and The Light We Carry, and I'm not sure which one it is, but she talks about how it could have been a podcast actually. She talks about how the night before the book was released, she's lying in bed and she's telling Barack Obama how worried she is about the reaction she's going to receive to her book.
Yeah.
And, I did have a moment or two like that.
Some panic, a little bit of panic.
But then I also remember that it's like acting, right? Not that I was acting.
No.
I just mean that, or when you're performing on a stage, let me put it that way.
Right.
More likely than not, the audience wants you to win because you're doing something or performing something that they want to be good.
Yeah.
Whether it's giving a speech, whether it's they want you to win, and you see it at TED Talks, right?
Yeah.
When you go there, the audience is really encouraging of speakers, even if they're having some difficulty.
I'm thinking to myself when I listen to someone like a stand-up comedian or something, I'm literally holding my breath until that moment when they make me laugh or they come through. So yeah,
exactly, yes. And so I thought, well, I'm doing something that a lot of people probably don't have the courage to do and can't see themselves doing. So I'm hoping they want me to win because they can learn from it as well.
Yeah. So you channeled the readers.
I did, yes.
Did you have the readers in mind?
And then I also laughed to myself. I said, well, they say if you want to hide something from Black people, you just put it in the book.
So you thought nobody would read it. No. We're reading it. Here we are reading it.
Indeed.
Okay, let's go a little bit more into the content of the book. Your early influences. I'll ask you to recount that story, the 6-year-old you meeting Kenneth Kaunda. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so I accompanied my parents to the wedding of his daughter. And as is typical at Zambian weddings, there's a receiving line during the reception. People will go up to greet the bridal party. And so I joined the queue, the little 6-year-old me.
Yeah.
And got to Kenneth Kaunda, held out my little hand, and did a little fukama, like a genuflection, for those of you who might not be Zambian. And he was like, what? You did not just do a tiny little... Exactly, yes. So he's like, put his hand on my head and started to push me down. And I first I resisted. I was like, squirming away. It was very, very strong. His hand was very strong and very persistent about the fact that he wanted me to kneel from the ground.
Actual kneeling.
Kneeling on the ground. And so when I got to the ground, I was like, okay, all right, what else will I do? no control over this issue. So greeted everybody else for the next 5 or so people from the ground. Then I got up and I went away. But for those of us, not you, I know you're too young, but who grew up under the Kasonde era, he was so powerful. He was like, they used to say, in heaven we have God, and on earth we have Kasonde. You know, he was just an all-powerful figure. Yeah. Not just locally, but regionally. And that experience for me, I felt that power in a physical way. Right. You know, I felt like, gosh, this is, you know, so I never forgot that experience. And it was very interesting.
It's interesting to me that you mentioned the word power twice. But in the book, you talk about, it said something about his leadership. So is there that difference between power and leadership? Yeah.
No, oh dear, now I have to reread my book before coming. But what I meant was the power of his leadership. Right. Like his authority, his charge of the country. That's what I really meant. Yeah. Yeah.
And what did it make you think about his authority? Like, what was your perception of his power then at that time, or what power was based on that?
Dominance. Yeah, dominance. And I mean, later on, I talk about patriarchy, which is kind of, you know, male dominance over women in society. And power at that time was very much seen as a male attribute. So I think there's also that linked to that. Yeah.
I mean, there is a time in our history when women were leaders, and what happened was when slave trade and all this movement started happening with different tribes and stuff, and war became an important part of how we were living. Then it became like power needed to be by warmongering, and we've kind of, that's my theory. We've kind of stuck with that. I think that's where that dominance thing came from. I might be wrong.
Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say women are still very powerful in our society. I think of sort of the Vanasenge in Bemba culture. They're very powerful women. But they're expected to play a supporting role to whichever man is in charge. See, that's the difference. So the trouble comes when you want to lead from the front, as opposed to play that supporting role.
What was the reaction of the people around you when you were being pushed down and you?
I have no recollection. It was literally just me and him in the zone, you know?
That's so funny.
No recollection.
And after that, you went to primary school in Swaziland?
No, I went to secondary school.
Secondary school in Swaziland, where you had, multicultural. You say it was multicultural, a lot of different types of people. And then university. Eventually, after testing the waters with Unza, you can find out how that happened in the book. But after testing the waters with Unza, you went to the UK, Leicester. Very multicultural. Leicester is like almost little India kind of thing. I'm interested in knowing how that experience of having so many different kinds of people around you, how you think that shaped your worldview.
Well, it certainly meant I had a different worldview from people who'd only grown up in Zambia. Because, so many different ideas were influencing how I thought about particularly things like, for example, at the schools I went to, it never struck me that boys were treated any differently from girls, or that they were expected to be less intelligent than boys. That just didn't really occur to me there. Actually, even in primary school, it was also sort of a multicultural a school. I went to Lake Road in the 80s. And that was also quite a multicultural place. But obviously the dominant culture was Zambian culture, although not in the most conventional sense. It just opened up my mind, which is what traveling does, right?
Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite Zambian sayings, don't quote me in Bemba, but anyway, when a child leaves, a child that doesn't leave home thinks their mother's cooking is the best.
Mwana Atashanina.
That one.
Okay. I don't know about my pronunciation either, but yeah.
So that, I think, is there's so much wisdom that comes out of Bemba sayings. And that one, I think, is definitely something I've lived, for sure.
Yeah. And so it's helped you sort of broaden the scope of your probably imagination of what's possible and what should happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you say that you went to Lakewood in the 80s and it was multicultural. And Zambia is actually quite a multi-ethnic country. I think a lot of the rest of the world only realized when we had Guy Scott, but before that we had Patel. Like we've had people, even in positions of power, who are from different ethnicities. But do you think that we have a legal framework that encourages this sort of different types of people in society? That I'm thinking here primarily about like the idea of being a Christian nation, and how does that restrict the way that we allow other people to be fully Zambian?
Well, much as we have that provision in our preamble that says that Zambia is a Christian nation, we're still very much a secular state. It's nothing like, I mean, you only have to think of, for example, Islamic states, say in the Arab world, where religion is a definite prescription for everybody. That's the code by which everybody has to live. That's not the way it is in Zambia. It's still very much kind of an ideal, but no one is constrained from expressing themselves. Although under Bill 10, because there was a threat that would come into the main content of the Constitution.
Right.
That was a threat against other religions and beliefs in the country, for sure.
So as long as it's in the preamble,
it's just, you can't go to court and try and enforce it, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. So your time in Leicester, you had Professor Peter Kampa, and you learned civil liberties. What was that course about, and what was it like?
The course was basically it was human rights, just by another name. I think it just introduced me to the law as a tool for promoting human rights, which was not entirely alien to me because, as I mentioned, my time in Swaziland at Waterford introduced me to activism, per se, fighting for justice, equality, non-discrimination, all those good things. So I think it was the first course that I really took an interest in, because that was in my second year, and I tell you, I had a terrible time my first year, terrible. But yeah, the second year, I thought, yeah, this is what it should be.
What was it about that course?
At my core, I don't think I've used this word a lot today. I've always felt like somebody who would fight for the underdog, and that's really what it meant to be, to stand up for the vulnerable and the marginalized in society.
And in that vein, when you came back during your time at Ziali, at Ziali, I think, yeah, you then started to volunteer at the National Legal Aid Clinic. What were you doing there, and what was that time like?
Well, by the time I started volunteering there, I'd already completed my Ziali, so I not only had theoretical understanding of the law, I also understood the practice. So I was being a lawyer.
What kind of cases were you? What kind of people did you see?
Most of the cases were around family law, sort of inheritance, custody, divorce, and just small things like debt collection, etc. Things that really affect the ordinary person. I mean, we're not talking like constitutional law issues or anything, just like basic things, employment cases. Yeah.
And so that must have fed into how you went on to fashion your career going on. Did it influence you at all?
I mean, after that, I was worn out because it was quite emotionally exhausting. So then I went to work for a commercial firm for 15 years, and whilst doing work and volunteering at the Law Association of Zambia. Yeah. So I've always done that human rights work some way, shape or form.
And I think it's one of those things where people will always ask, but why? And I think, you don't always know why. Like sometimes it's just intrinsically something that's you, right? Like you just are this person that wants to champion people's rights, and
exactly.
You don't really know why. Like we can't open your brain and find out, much as many people would like to. And so I'm glossing over because there's a lot of detail in here, but you traverse LAS, you start to take up leadership positions within there. And one thing that really struck me was the veteran LAS president that said to you that you said never told you what to do, but always asked the right questions. And that was at a time when I think, you were already working towards becoming LAS president. I don't know if that would have been in your mind, but what did that teach you about leadership?
Although I quite, sometimes it was frustrating, I have to tell you. I wanted him to tell me the answer. I want to know. But I think often when you ask people advice, you already know the answer.
Do you think so?
Often. Most times, I would say. So really, it was kind of teasing out the answer you already had within you. But I have to say, I haven't followed that style. It's just not me. Personally, I'm very direct, and I just say what's on my mind. You can take it or leave it.
Yeah.
So that was his style. I thought it was very interesting and noteworthy, but I haven't followed in his footsteps.
So you just say, this is what should happen.
Well, not exactly. I just give my view of, I don't tell people what to do, but I'll give my opinion of a certain issue.
Yeah. Okay. And then within LAS, various political machinations, like various, you came up against a lot. How do you look back on your time as president of LAS and your time at LAS in general? Because reading the book, I felt a certain level of melancholy, a certain almost, maybe if I had tried to be more popular, or if I had told my story in a different way.
No, not at all. In terms of regret, no. I'm very convinced in my mind that I did the best I could in the circumstances that I did. Although, I mean, when I say things like, maybe if I'd done this, when I look at my circumstances, very often I didn't have much of a choice. For example, I say maybe if I'd socialized more with the people. Guys, they were cadres. No, I couldn't just walk around anyhow the way I wanted to. So, no, it's not regret that I'm expressing. I'm trying to look into the mind of what other people may have seen or not been able to see because of my circumstances, right? That you don't know what's going on with somebody. And so I was just trying to see, well, maybe if the circumstances had been different, maybe I would have been perceived differently. But I don't regret anything. Like I said, I did the best I could. Yeah. Honestly, I tried, guys.
Are there any like big lessons that you learned from that? Like moving on from there, that you say you don't regret it. So what were the major takeaways from that time?
Stand in your truth no matter what.
Yeah. Be steadfast.
Exactly, yes.
And then you had to reinvent yourself. And so I'm interested in, you say resilience is very important. And, you could have maybe decided to fight and say, no, I'm not leaving. I don't know. This is where I belong or whatever, but you reinvented yourself, started chapter 1. So how do you see that the push and pull between resilience and having to reinvent yourself, or deciding when it's time to let go and say, I've done everything that I can here. And now it's time to move on to something new.
Well, resilience doesn't mean no change. You can change course and still be resilient in whatever you choose to do. It just so happens I decided I needed a different vehicle to do what I was passionate about. And that's how chapter 1 was born. And even there, it was no easy journey, unfortunately. But that's life. It's life. I mean, I came across a post on Instagram, I think it was, talking about, sometimes when your path is difficult, it's because, like the Bible says, when you're given much is expected of you, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I think God is very demanding of me.
Not you being demanding of yourself?
Possibly too. I mean, I do have fairly high standards when it comes to my work. That too, but only because I believe that doing the right thing is not easy. And I choose to do the right thing. I just try to.
Yeah. And that being demanding of yourself led to one of the chapters at chapter 1 that you say was very difficult. When you, and I think that this is, you can correct me if I'm wrong. This came from being an introverted leader who had to deal with so much. And then, because I'm an introvert, I'm a very highly functioning, myself a highly functioning introvert. So I can only have like a certain amount of energy from people before I need everybody to go away. And I need to sit in like a dark room by myself. So when I was reading your outburst, I thought this must be because of having too much energy from too many things going on and not having enough time to yourself. And so that's one of the lessons, like, I think as an introverted person is to be able to preserve your energy, right? What other things, first of all, what other coping mechanisms do you have as an introverted leader? And how do you, what are your strengths as an introverted leader? Because a lot of people think you have to be an extrovert to be a good leader. But I've been coming across more and more introverted leaders recently.
Well, I mean, that particular instance, I think, was more as a result of being under high level of stress with no outlet, more than a problem of introversion, I think. Certainly, introverts are far more reflective, I believe. But personally, I know what my strengths are. I'm very strategic and I get things done. Unfortunately, not everybody can see the vision as it's unfolding. So
it's in the vision is in your head.
Yes. So that's the challenge. But yeah, I think ultimately productivity and getting things done is important.
Yeah, and that's one of the major strengths is like being able to see where something might go and lead the team in that direction, even if sometimes they have to just go with you without knowing, walk blindly with you. Okay, let's move on to female leadership. You strike me as someone who has a very close-knit group of friends. And I think this also sometimes comes from introversion because you're comfortable amongst certain people. And those are the people who you gravitate towards. So I was interested because of the foreword that Laura Miti wrote for you. And I read a little bit of it. She says, I first met Linda in person when she was serving as the first president of the Law Association of Zambia, and I was leading a civil society organization. We were both not too popular with the then government because of our advocacy work. And sometimes in the book, I think you think you were not too popular in general.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah? And she says, no, Linda and I did not meet at yet another what shall we do to respond to a new abrogation of the law by power holders CSO meeting. She invited me for coffee at a cafe. And already in this conversation, you've spoken about Natasha Chumia. How important are those female friendships or, fellow female leaders to have around you as sounding boards or just to know that they exist? How important have they been for you in your career?
Well, I think Michelle Obama has articulated this far better than I did in my book. When she talks about her kitchen table, the people who you can totally be yourself with and just, rant and rave and commiserate and with or, share ideas with. I think it's very important to have that sounding board when you need it. Very, very important.
What has it done for you and your decision making? Because I noticed throughout the book are littered instances when you're thinking of doing something and you reach out to somebody and say, what do you think of this? Why do that? Why not just trust your instinct?
Very often I do trust my instincts, but there are times when I think it's more around how than the whether to do something.
Okay.
That I seek counsel over. It's really quite ironic because the perception of me, certainly in the profession, is that I'm somebody who doesn't listen and bulldozes their way, but I'm very consultative, but only with people whose opinions I respect.
Right.
That's me.
Yeah. And it's interesting you talk about bulldozing and the kind of language that people use
of women.
On women, because that was going to be the next thing I was going to talk about. You spoke about Thatcher and Hillary, and certainly I know Margaret Thatcher. I mean, in around the world, everybody thinks of the first British female prime minister, and we all thought the British loved her.
No.
And they just don't.
Well, she was a very divisive figure. She had those who were, very much in support of her, and those who were very much against. I think it's just one of those people who it wasn't very easy to find people who were sort of lukewarm, sort of middle of the road. It was either strongly for, strongly against.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she also didn't suffer fools lightly.
No.
But she also didn't care too much about bringing women along. So
indeed.
So the women don't, she's not the favorite amongst women as well. And we all know what happened to Hillary and how they ended up with Trump because they didn't want Hillary. Basically, that's what it was. So we know what happens to female leaders. But how do you decide to combat the language that we use against women? Is that something that you now just say, look, if they're going to talk, they're going to talk? Or do you rail against it, or do you just do a bit of self-care and say, look, that's how it is? How do you cope with that, or choose to manage it?
I say that rallying against it is a complete waste of time. So I've subscribed to the point of view, I think it's Oprah Winfrey who said it, that excellence is the best answer to all your detractors, because there's no argument against it. Mm-hmm. After that, there's just insults. Yeah, that's all they can do. Mm-hmm. But I think people can see through that. So yeah.
So you just do your part and let them get on with it. Mm. I confess that reading...
Except I do, when other people are attacked, I do. I'm very deliberate about...
That's interesting.
Supporting them, yeah.
That's interesting. You won't do it for yourself, because then it's just fighting. But if you...
Well, yeah. Also, I think it when you it doesn't look, because I find people can't see it when you're sort of advocating for yourself in that way, defending yourself. It just seems defensive,
right? As
opposed to supportive of a particular point of view. So I support other women who are standing on a principle that I believe in when an issue arises. Mm-hmm. I can only hope that people do the same for me, but sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
But, that's life.
Something I learned from reading this is that maybe more often I need to also check myself. I think of myself as a feminist, and I will stand up for women. But there are times when I will... Even me, because patriarchy it's instilled in us. Sometimes we have to fight against it, even just ourselves. Mm-hmm. Where I will maybe have judged someone differently, a woman differently than I would judge a man. I would maybe judge a woman's personality based on how she looks, or based on the type of language she uses, in a way that sometimes I won't judge men in the same way. And so taking also from what you've just said about, I hope other women would stand up for me, is that if I think less like that, if I'm more conscious of the language that we use, then I'm able to turn on to someone else and say, don't use that language, because it's actually a human being on the other side of that. And Indeed. It makes a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Another thing that women come up against or have to deal with is biological roles. And how sometimes it's our biology that we can't do certain things. Sometimes people talk about, you talk about the glass ceiling, but maybe a woman has gone away to have children. Nobody else will carry those children unless you get a surrogate, and you can give people maternity leave, but just being away from the office makes, a difference. This is something that you spoke about in the book in a very impactful way. Probably the chapter that I think for me was most, I want to say harrowing. I think it's the only word that I can use. And I just want to read one, little bit of it here, where you say, you're in the hospital, you've just had your baby, and you just found out that your baby has died 2 days after being born. And you say, when I got back to my room, all traces of the congratulatory cards and flowers had been removed. I got into my bed and cried. I cried for 2 days straight. On the second day, the nurse told me to stop it, otherwise I would get sick. It's so typical of a Zambian nurse. What was it like writing that?
It was not easy. And in fact, even reading it is not easy. Like I said, it was a story that I thought had to be told because it has been untold. And for me, that was the greater cause.
Yeah. And you mentioned how you, at the time, were going through, I think it would have been just before the last election, the second last election, was it?
So no. I think at that time, that was the time of the judgment was coming out on the ministers.
Yes,
yeah,
that's what it was. Yes, and so that was a huge thing that was happening.
And yes, it was actually the week of the national election. You're right. Yes, that's right.
And so, and you were in your bed, and people were coming to tell you, you know, and that's a very you know, many women will go through times when they have to deal with, you know, pregnancy or periods and still have to work at the same time. You went through that at such a much bigger, you know, level. You know, it's like you were saying, you know, God has like bigger trials for you because you have bigger shoulders.
Literally.
Do you think we're doing a good job as a country in recognizing those biological roles that women have and making space for us to be able to work despite them, but also not diminishing our capabilities? And the reason why I say it like that is because we know we have Mother's Day in Zambia, something for which we have been held around the world. And sometimes it's been decried in this country by many men who just think women are being lazy. And we can have a debate about whether some women take advantage of that or not. And so it's something that is necessary, or you can say whether you think it's necessary or not, but at the same time, may make us seem weaker. So are we doing a good job of creating space for women, given some of those biological... I
think the law is certainly very progressive, but again, like you alluded to, there are some women who abuse that, and unfortunately that reflects on all women everywhere. And I'm actually hearing that there's moves to amend the Employment Code Act. And it sounds like some of those things might be tinkered with.
Right.
So I would just say to women, you know, you bear a huge responsibility, not just for yourself, but also for all other women who actually need these provisions to remain in the law. I mean, I just think of, I don't know how the women of my parents' generation managed. There was no paid maternity leave.
No paid maternity leave at all.
And people need to reflect on these things so that women can continue to have provisions that are supportive of their roles at home and in the extended family. So please don't abuse the law.
What more do you think we can do as a country, as a nation, to, like, I know you said that the rules are quite progressive, but are there other things that you think could be introduced that would make us even more progressive? Maybe childcare in the workplace or something?
Well, I think by and large we're very fortunate in that childcare is quite affordable in this country. So that's something that is not there in the West. And I think we need to be very grateful for that and use it to our advantage. I think that's pretty much that.
Yeah. So the rule, what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say is that the laws are there. We just need to know them better, and maybe better implementation. Yeah,
and not abuse them so that it doesn't reflect badly on other women.
Please don't abuse them, because I think a lot of women, especially female leaders, are sometimes scared to tell their fellow females to stop abusing certain laws because we don't want to look like
she-dragon. Yeah.
But yeah, okay. So lessons learned. You have a section in the book called leadership and vulnerability, about leadership and vulnerability, power and vulnerability. Power, there's that dichotomy again, power and leadership. What are your thoughts around, being vulnerable as a leader now, having gone through everything that you've gone through, times when you've had to, choose whether to tell your story or not, times when you've been told, the story that you're telling is not the story that we think you're telling. Instances where, for example, at LAS, people thought you were trying to, you were doing things for your own glory, and you thought, well, I'm doing things for everybody else. That's differences in the storytelling and whatever, and how maybe sometimes being vulnerable means actually telling your story, actually allowing people to know you better, and that sort of thing. What are your views around leadership and vulnerability today?
Well, I think timing is everything. I don't think that you need to be vulnerable with everybody. I don't think that's wise. Why did I decide to put it in a book where everybody can read it? I wanted to demystify leadership, particularly for women in leadership.
Right.
And I thought to myself, well, I could wait until I'm 80, but then I said, well, I'm not trying to jinx myself, but who knows whether I will get to 80, right?
Knock on wood.
Knock on wood, indeed. So it's also important not to tell your story publicly in the moment of vulnerability, because you might just be a real mess.
Right.
Not good.
You might not be ready.
Exactly.
Yes.
So you should absolutely be ready to do it.
Yeah.
When you've processed everything, when you are in control of your thoughts and your emotions, absolutely, that's the best time. But whenever somebody asks me this question, I refer to Brene Brown, who is a vulnerability expert, and she says, not everybody deserves your story. I told my story because I'm kind of a public figure,
Yes.
So I thought, well, people are telling stories about me anyway. I might as well tell my own story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Control the narrative. Yeah. That's something that I got strongly from here, is like, control the narrative, and then whatever people think beyond that, that's
not none of my business.
None of your business.
Exactly.
So going back to that 6-year-old who felt the power, the strength, and the one-on-one, very like godlike, this person is commanding things. What are your views now on what makes a good leader? If it's not sheer power.
Somebody who's prepared to give up authority to do the right thing.
That's interesting.
But even if you don't have authority, I think it's standing in your truth no matter what.
That's the main one. When you say someone who's ready to give up authority, can you give an example of what you mean?
Sure. Maybe a current one would be someone like President Jimmy Carter. He was a one-term president.
Yes.
And cared more about doing the right thing than winning the next election. Like, he lost the next election because he was busy trying to negotiate the release of hostages. I think they were Iranians, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he didn't play politics. He just decided he wanted to really have them released. And unfortunately for him, obviously, they were not. They might just have been released just before the election. And now I can't remember the full details, but
there is a movie.
For him,
Google it.
Yeah. Oh, for him, there was life after the presidency. It wasn't about a position.
Right.
It was about his service to humanity, and I think that's such a powerful example.
Yeah. Because he did go on to do so much work around the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Humanitarian work.
Yeah. And he's still much beloved now.
Absolutely.
There are people who on the right who are very, macho, who think of him as a weak leader. There are people who say he was a wimp.
Exactly,
he's not one of our greatest leaders. And so it's interesting that, and I hesitate to use the word because we love it so much in this country, but that humility, that ability to
much abused word in our society, indeed. Yeah.
That humility to say, look, this is my greater work, and I don't need to fight for the presidency.
Absolutely,
I'm doing more.
Exactly.
Yeah. And he lost his wife.
He did.
Yeah.
Very moving. He really loved his wife. You could tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you to read something for us.
Ooh.
It's not something you wrote.
Oh.
I knew you'd like that better. It's from a speech that you made, valedictorian speech for Mr. Munyama. And it's a poem called Not How Did He Die, but How Did He Live? Maybe you can read first.
Just the first stanza?
First one or two. See how you feel.
All right. So, not how did he die, but how did he live? Not what did he gain, but what did he give? These are the units to measure the worth of a man, regardless of birth. Not what was his church, not what was his creed, but had he befriended those really in need? Was he ever ready, with word of good cheer, to bring back a smile, to banish a tear? Not what did the sketch in the newspaper say, but how many were sorry when he passed away?
What do you want people to say about you? In the end.
That's so difficult because I often think more about what my legacy is with people who actually knew me. Was I there? Was I present?
Do you think that's what's important?
Absolutely. I have to tell you, I'm falling short at the moment. I really must improve if I want a good eulogy. But I tried. I want to be known as somebody who tried their best to live up to their potential, to do the right thing, to be kind, to be generous, and make a difference.
Yeah. This might be an odd person to invoke in this moment, but I was listening to a podcast with Busta Rhymes.
On Diary of a CEO.
Yes. Did you watch it?
Part of it. Yeah. I listened to the
tears.
podcast.
I was bawling. Watch the rest of it. It's amazing. But one of the things that he spoke about was how he had to make many sacrifices with his kids, and he has 6 kids. And by all accounts, based on how he tells his story, he did all he could, for them. It wasn't a perfect environment because different mothers and all of that. But one of the things that he says is that when asked what he would say to his kids, he said he would say, be selfish. And he says selfish in the sense of do just the things that feed you. And he says he knows that there are times when he wasn't there for them in the way that he should have been. And he would do it in the same way all over again. And what you said just now sort of made me think of that when you said, you're falling short with the people that are closest to you. Do you think that that's just something that leaders have to traverse? How does,
That's an interesting question. When I think of someone like Nelson Mandela, who had to give up 27 years of his life in prison for the causes that he was fighting for, I have heard that that was a very painful thing for him. And that when he was released from prison, possibly one of his biggest regrets that he lost time with his family.
Right.
And I also think of someone like Barack Obama, who missed a huge chunk of his children's lives because he was president. But what great people they were, you know? I don't know that those individuals would say that the cost was worth it to them personally, but definitely the world benefited from their contributions to society.
Yeah. So it's the rest of the world at the expense of. And it always has to be at the expense of. Maybe it's always that way. And I'm trying to think of someone who seems to have had it all, but that doesn't exist, does it? And they say can women have it all? And you say, you can, but different.
Not at the same time.
Do you ascribe to that as well?
Probably. Yeah.
And I think it's okay. I think younger me would have said, no, we want it all right now.
Yeah, give me soft life. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for sitting with me.
You are very welcome. I enjoyed it very much.
I'm not quite finished.
Oh.
So we have a final question. In the book, you quote a lot of other people. Reading it, I was just like, have you read all these things? Jesus, how much reading you do.
A lot of them. Yeah.
That's a lot of reading. So our final question is always, what either book, music, song, speech, poem, whatever type of story has either influenced you most, or do you think exemplifies your way of being?
Well, there's quite a number. So like I knew there would be. Lean In was very influential. I am loving, first of all, I love Becoming from Michelle Obama, but The Light We Carry is really, it's a wonderful guide, if you like.
I've heard a lot about this.
Been exposed at the highest levels of leadership.
So tell us, first of all, who wrote it? What is it about?
So The Light We Carry is a book by Michelle Obama, the former First Lady of the United States. And why it spoke to me so much is because, she inspired me actually to be vulnerable.
Right.
Because I thought, wow, if she, in all her first ladiness, can be so vulnerable and open about her experiences. Yeah. And I personally haven't been enriched by it. I also want to pay that forward in my life. Hopefully.
Right. Yes.
Inshallah. I'll have this, some impact on other people. Because, particularly when I was president of LAS, I felt like a unicorn. Like there was no other woman I knew in my network who had a similar political experience, if you like, who I could sound off, or who could be a sounding board to me. Yeah. And so then I did look to the Tuli Madoncellas, the Michelle Obamas, the Oprah Winfrey for inspiration and just some kind of empowerment to, as Oprah likes to say, live my best life. Yeah. So that, and then of course, Dr. Maya Angelou's poem, Still I Rise. Yes. Very, very impactful. So uplifting. Yeah, yeah. Particularly when you're in the thick of things. Yeah? Yeah.
Is it something you've picked up and looked at or reflected on in difficult times?
For sure. Yeah. Because, in this line of work, so often you're misunderstood. People don't want to appreciate your contributions to society or even want to diminish them. Yeah. And you're like, I'm still winning.
I'm still here. Still I rise. Exactly. Yeah. Indeed. Okay, in true Linda Kasonde fashion, instead of you telling me the lessons. I will tell you what I have learned.
Okay. All right.
So the first thing I learned was ask. We spoke about that at the very beginning. So I'm just going to go around asking everyone everything now. The next lesson
like
you told, yes, and not taking no for an answer. I'm going to have the resilience of the 6-year-old with the hand on your head. The next lesson that I learned was to adapt. I had to do things a little bit differently today from how I normally would do things.
Okay.
Because I am, I prepare as much as I did with you, but maybe a little more flighty with my questions. And I think that tightening it up helped me today. So adaptability. So I put down be prepared and strategic as well about if you want things to go the way you want them to go. I learned that language matters and we need to be very careful how we speak about women. And I think that's like a huge lesson in Zambia. We do not have enough female leaders because of the way we speak about them. And that might be one of the biggest reasons why we don't have them, because nobody wants to be that woman that is being disparaged. So language matters. And then share your story, vulnerability. And then the one that you mentioned all the way through is stand in your truth.
Absolutely.
So those are my lessons that I took away from here.
Oh, great. My work is done.
I have one final cheeky question. Everyone who writes a book, at least in America, it's a precursor to running for office.
Oh. No, that's so funny because my sister's partner said to me, what did he say? He said, what is this in aid of? Like, what? Why are you doing this? Honestly, I just wrote it to write my story. And again, because they always say that African stories are so often told through the lens of a Western academic or someone like that. And I think it's so much more powerful and resonates so much more, particularly with the people who are from that continent or even that country. When it's somebody they can relate to or who looks like them.
Yes.
So much more powerful. So that was my aim, actually, just to really impart my lessons to the world. And nothing more, really. That was it.
So you're not running anytime soon?
No.
Or thinking of it?
No.
Or maybe sometime in the future?
She's keeping to us. She's keeping her to her ask.
You told me to ask. Okay, this is the book, Women, Resilience, and the Will to Lead. I'd urge everybody to read it. It's such a good book.
Don't borrow it, buy it.
It taught me so many lessons. It's an easy read. So anyone who's scared of reading, it's easy, and it demystifies leadership, yes, but also humanizes not just female leaders in general, but you in particular as well, because I had to think very hard about what I'm going to look like today, because I've always thought of you as most prim and proper, some higher being. Everything always, in place. And it's nice to see that you're human like the rest of us, and you go through things like the rest of us, and but you just find ways of coping and ways of coming up ahead. So we are led.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Can't wait for your book.
Yeah, I can't wait for it either. So where can people find the book? Or, you have your newsletter as well. Like, where do people find more information?
So my book is available at Book World all across Zambia. Okay, not in every province, but it's pretty much most of them.
Yeah.
Also in Lusaka on Afri Delivery. And internationally on Amazon. It's available on Kindle and paperback.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm considering doing a hardback. Yeah.
You should. I mean, normally it's the other way around, Linda, but
Indeed.
And the other thing that I would say you should consider, because it's very personable. It's not written in, convoluted language. I think you should do an audiobook.
Oh,
are you doing one?
Well, you see, this is now the problem with being self-published. You have to pay for everything yourself.
Yes.
So I'll give it some thought.
Yeah. Okay. Think hard about it. Audio is the new thing. Thank you so much for sitting with me.
Thank you, my dear. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I've enjoyed myself.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.